Hey everybody, I'm James from Crumbling Keep, and I am joined today by two of our professional DMs, Mikayla and Morrigan.
Hi.
So
Hello.
we're here to talk Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden. But before we jump right into that, why don't you both do a little introducing of yourselves?
Morgan, you want to go?
Oh, okay. Um, I'll go first. My name is Morrigan Robbins. I am a creative writer, game designer, and
So we're here to
goat
talk.
enthusiast. I'm recently freelance, and but while I was working on Rime of the Frostmaiden, I was actually working over at Wizards of the Coast as their lore person, and before that as an intern. We'll probably talk a little bit more about how my role was kind of different because of that from Michaela's a little bit later. But yeah, so very excited to be here today. I don't know really what else to say. I'm so always so bad at introducing myself.
Oh, I thought it was excellent. It's great to be on a call with both of you. I'm Mikayla, my pronouns are they, she, and I was one of the writers on Maiden and worked primarily with Anne Gregerson on the 10 pound sections as well as some other um, sections based around like locations. So yeah, Maury was a huge help to our team, even though they did like a little bit of a different type of writing, but it was a super fun experience, and I'm so happy to talk about it today.
Noise coming in from the background there, and that was the loudest window to be shut ever. Uh, Coming from the Windy City on this point in Chicago, and I guess it was just proving its point. So I will try and get the audio a little louder for you all. So sorry about that. Well, awesome. So for those who might not know, what is Icewind Dale Rime of the Frost Maiden?
Icewind Dale Rime of the Frostmaiden is a the newest hardback adventure module that Dungeons and Dragons has recently released. It is a horror campaign for levels 1 to 12. I believe 1 to 11, 1 to 12. I always forget. Somewhere around there. And it explores the realm of, you guessed it, Icewind Dale over in the Forgotten Realms, and it has a bunch of familiar locations to those who are familiar with Icewind Dale, but also presents it in a fresh new way and has a lot of horrifying secrets for you to uncover throughout the adventure. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I would also like to add that um, it's really built to be um, designed for both people who are familiar with the setting and brand new to it. So you
Mhm.
don't need to have a ton of background on Icewind Dale or the Forgotten Realms in order to play the game.
Yeah. One of the things I love about the book in particular is the fact that there's a lot of content that is easily transferable to any setting. So it's really gonna be your go-to book if you want to run a campaign in a tundra type setting as well, because it includes things like avalanche rules and a thick with two C's bestiary of new monsters that are local to the area, as well as just awesome kind of like encounters, wilderness, travel stuff for dealing with like the conditions of a tundra-like environment. So if you're interested in running like a similar setting in your campaign, I cannot recommend picking this book up enough anyways, even if you're not like someone who wants to run the whole adventure module. um the way that it's set up too is that there's a lot of like ways that you can like basically pick and choose which parts of the adventure you want to use. It's very sandboxy in that way.
I think it's great that it takes into account the tundra environment, because I feel that a lot of adventurers don't like to focus on natural hazards. So I think that's like a real landmark win for myself.
Landmark.
Rob Moore says his players are really loving the secrets, which is cool. And also, Josh Self, the bestiary is fun. They've managed to befriend a snowy owlbear, and she is terrifying. So, well done on that as well. That's really fun. And this actually kind of, some of the things you said were a good bridge into one of our questions about how you made it accessible to players unfamiliar with Icewind Dale, but also keeping it relevant to the lore. So one of our viewers, I'd love to get their perspective on the process of making a module in a way that honors traditional settings like Icewind Dale, while still being accessible to newer audiences. Also the process of turning writing meant to be read into writing meant to be played, like knowing when to stat things and not, what to plan out, and what to leave to the players and DMs and aspects of that nature. And I think what they mean by that is taking something that was first like a novelization, and making it gamified, which, when I think of writing adventures, there's the fiction, and then there's the game, and the two need to, like, intertwine, but I think they're both very important aspects. But yeah, do you have any insight on that when you were going through the process of it?
Yeah, oh, go ahead, Maury.
No, go ahead.
We have pretty different experiences insofar as familiarity with the lore goes. I have never read an Arya Salvatore book, haven't read Icewind Dale stuff, and to kind of help familiarize us with it, Watsi gave us essentially a primer so we could understand the setting and the themes of it. So again, like, that just helps me feel assured that, like, you can go into this setting without having to have had a ton of prior familiarity with it, because it's incorporated into the book. So it doesn't make assumptions that you know things.
Right. I think a big part of that was actually the way that they leaned on the freelancers for the particular production of this book, comparatively to other books that Wizards of the Coast has introduced in the past, where the primary production was done in-house. And I think that the use of new voices and really empowering those voices to sound different and individual was one of the ways that really helped with this adaptation. A lot of the stuff where they were weaving in the lore and stuff was stuff that was either sewn in afterwards by the people who were doing the editing of the book once all the freelancers sent in their work, or it was emphasized in the beginning in that primer that Mikayla talked about when the freelancers were given that work. So I worked as kind of their lore archivist. I actually wasn't there when they were creating the primer for this particular book, but I helped create similar cheat sheets for other products that helped freelancers and other partners and stuff be able to work in the lore and the IP of D&D without having as much of a basis in it. And so for me, that meant I read the entirety of the Icewind Dale trilogy, and I had like thick notes and highlighters and had to turn that into a little cheat sheet. And so that was a lot of what my role in the early development of this product was. I did end up doing some writing for the book as well, which we can talk about later when we end up talking about goats. But
and we will be talking about goats.
Yes, goats are important.
For sure.
So yeah, on that note, first off, I think a D&D lore archivist is just a fantastic term that I'm glad to hear is a thing in the world. But also, from my own experience doing professional DMing and also helping other people get comfortable with starting to DM, I've seen a lot of people that are really like they're intimidated by the rules, but they're also intimidated by at this point just the sheer amount of lore that's out there, and they feel like they have to know everything.
Everything.
Yeah. Which, if anyone out there watching this is worried about this, trust me, you don't. Even if you have a player that knows, like, even if you have a player that knows more than you, it's okay. It's fine. They'll get into it. But anyway, making the adventure accessible for folks that don't have that large library of lore in their head, that haven't read, like, every Icewind book set in Icewind Dale or whatnot, I think is really important. And I think and while still being able to make it pertinent for people that do, like that's an awesome balance. And I
Yeah.
really think Rime and Frostmaiden really did that.
I think that one of the ways that it was able to excel in that is the fact that it presented it as less of a rigidly structured adventure, and it is much more of an exploration of Icewind Dale as a setting. There is a plot, there is a story, there is stuff going on to entice the players, but there's a lot of, especially earlier on in the game, free form, and there's an emphasis on this exploration of Icewind Dale, and I think it's that like early early part of the module really helps not only the unfamiliar players to Icewind Dale, but the unfamiliar GM to get to know Icewind Dale, exploring the 10 towns, going a little further with the other locations introduced in chapter 2. Um, and I think that that really helps. And it also, like, there are like points where it says like this, like it'll actually like straight up point out like this is a nod to the R.A. Salvatore books and stuff like that. So if you want to find more information and incorporate that in, you can do that. But you can also have the freedom to make it your own version of Icewind Dale, just as you should, because it is your game.
Yeah, and to that, um, just the act of like spending that time in the early parts of the campaign, exploring 10 towns, getting different quests that help persuade characters to explore and follow new leads, that's going to help really reinforce the setting and the tone of the book. And there are a lot of tools within each of those chapters and sections to help you do that.
Mhm. Absolutely.
And I feel like arranging adventures, I like to call it like writing an adventure geographically, where it's not so much of a things aren't as much triggered by a timeline as they are triggered by a if you are here, this thing happens. I think it used to be a lot more of a default in adventure writing. I mean, especially if we look like at really early adventures when it was all dungeon based. Like the only thing that matters is what room you walked in. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, I think there's a lot of cool things you can do with that in a larger scale overland adventure, and it's. I feel one of the reasons that Rime of the Frost Maiden is unique among a lot of the other adventures is the way that it accomplished that, and I think that's something a lot of players haven't really seen before, which is really cool.
Mm.
So, one of our watchers here, Gareth, I'm looking forward to implementing the deadliness of the travel wilderness. Do you have any suggestions for maintaining slash achieving the dark horror tone of the setting? They especially love the thing and alien influence in it.
Cool. Well, as a game runner myself, in addition to being a writer, I really like using the five senses. So as you're going through like, the travel and adventure, um, what does the cold feel like? Is your body cold and tired? What's your equipment like? Are you having to stop and rest? Like just making it a little bit more oppressive and cold and miserable will help build that kind of like cold horror theme, I guess.
Um, I have a lot of tools that I like to use for this. I'm actually running this a module right now for a group of folks, and we've had a lot of fun. And I think you hit the head on the nail, Mikayla, when you said like what keep an eye on what their equipment's like and stuff like that. We actually rolled a wilderness encounter, which was the one where there's a stampede of reindeer that's coming after you, and it was while they were making camp, and so they had to basically like decide whether or like they had to pick only a handful of items that they could take with them from their camp as they to that weren't going to be trampled by the reindeer if they got out of the way. They could easily get out of the way, but they couldn't save everything. And so that loss of having like some broken weapons and broken adventuring gear and not having those things once they got to the next area meant that they had to like, you know, like thinking about that and like reinforcing that both in the gameplay and also in the descriptiveness, I think is and figuring out ways how to do the both of those things is really uh will help you deliver on that kind of feel, because it also has to feel like it's not just on like it's sitting in a novel, right? Because like descriptiveness but with no gamification and like ramifications like is makes it feel it like you're in a setting, but the consequences don't of their actions don't matter. And on the flip side, then you don't get the immersiveness that you would get and tonally if you just lean into the games, and it just feels like you're playing like a strategy game versus actually playing and immersing yourself in this world. um I am a huge horror nerd, and I love The Thing and Alien as well. And I also think don't be afraid to throw punches early on. Um,
Yeah.
if you are playing with, especially if your players are like gung ho for this setting and they want that, and be sure to check in with them as well. But typically if they're really into that and that's what they want, then they'll be okay with like maybe having to re-roll a character every once every few levels, you know. I had a situation in just like the first chapter, we were level 4, where like, you know, one of those secrets came up. It was the Slod host, the chestburster secret, and it came up in a wild situation, and I figured out a game interaction that is absolutely terrifying, and I will hand to you, and you are an evil DM if you decide to use this. There's one of the quests where you end up in a mine where there is a kobold possessed by a ghost, and that ghost decided to possess the character who had the Slod host. So I figure the Slod host would figure out that they are possessed by a ghost and try to yeet out. I checked in with the player; they were okay with the Slod bursting, even though it was so early on. And we had this Slod burst. The thing is Ghost, now that the character was dead, the ghost was yeeted as well. Ghosts have a feature called Horrifying Visage, which affects not only the player characters, but also every non undead creature that is in the area, including a Slod tadpole, which did not make it safe and aged up immediately. And so now we had a bunch of level 4 3 level 4 players who were dealing with an adult red Slod and a ghost. Eventually,
Ooh.
there was this epic thing where one of the other characters had the opportunity to tackle the Slod over a chasm into the Underdark, sacrificing themselves. It was amazing. But finding those moments in the game where it's written in, where like, oh, my players are gonna have a time with this, and making it feel organic. Um, like in that example is also like another thing I would like really like be on the lookout for moments that can be unique to your player group.
Yeah, yeah. And to that also, like you can have horror and pretty like low running stress in a fun way, without having to be super like detail oriented, like how many arrows do you have? Do you have enough rations? Because you can work those in as story elements without being too specific.
Exactly.
I am going to re-listen to that segment from both of you again after this recording, because that was just really good DM advice in general. There's a lot of gold there, folks, to mine. But yeah, I really like the idea of the descriptiveness. Just think about the last time you walked in the snow and you weren't quite dressed for it, and it was just a little too high, and your pants were really wet, and you're just like, God, I want to get home and warm and dry. And now think about just being out in the middle of the wilderness where there is no home and warm and dry. And I think there's a lot of gold there. And also, Morrigan, like, yeah, gamify that. It's a delicate balance of fiction and game, I think, when you're DMing. And 5e makes those two things interact in a way that I don't know that they quite have before. But once you get it, it's, yeah, that was all really good. Thank you. I'm really excited about all that. So yeah, we have some folks talking about how they've been using the adventure. Michael Ellsworth picked up the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide to get to know more about the surrounding area on Faerun, and used it when planning characters' backstories and everything, and give ideas about like what to do after level 12. So that's all really cool. Rally Prospect has been basically picking it apart and using bits and pieces for their homebrew campaign, which is like, yeah, that's a great thing to be able to, especially with an adventure like this. That's a great thing to be able to take things from it and use it for what you want to do. And if I'm reading this from Riley right, this is your first time DMing and you went with that, and that's pretty awesome as well.
That's so exciting to me. I love that.
Right? That's got to be super rewarding.
Yeah. One of the things that I really admire about what the folks who are working on the D&D team are doing at the moment is there is really an emphasis on, and this has been the case, I think, really since Waterdeep Dragon Heist, of making sure that these adventures can be picked up by first-time GMs. So that's been kind of the goal and intention with writing these adventures since then. And I think that Icewind Dale delivers on that, and I really enjoy that. I also think it's a very good for if you have a group of players who are used to playing like video game RPGs and like the quest-based MMOs and stuff like that. I think that this is a really good way to like kind of jump from that style of gameplay into D&D, because it has like very like, you go to a town, you get a quest, you do the thing, but it also like can introduce you to the other interesting parts of playing Dungeons and Dragons while still having those familiar gameplay loops.
That's a really good point as well, and I think something that isn't taken into account enough in adventure design, especially for like newer players. Because yeah, like folks are gonna have more familiarity probably going to a game for the first time with video game RPGs, and there's a lot you can learn from that going into Dungeons and Dragons. But there's so much more, so it's cool to have that kind of stepping stone. So Mikayla, when you talk about preserving the horror but not getting too caught up in the mechanics, do you have recommendations on how to apply that lesson to Chapter 4?
So I haven't run or play tested Chapter 4. I mostly worked on the lower lessons in the early chapters of the book, but with Icewind Dale at least, each of these chapters has a section for running this part of the adventure, and those have like really helpful tips on how to uh, pay attention to like the main plot points that you might want to hit or that lie in front of you, as well as like some specific things like for chapter 4 there's like a section on how long it takes for the dragon to reach each town, and so you can use like a time mechanic there in game. You can find like alternative paths to things as well. So I would say Without knowing too much specifically about the chapter, maybe Maury knows more about it that I am not as familiar with. I would just say try to figure out your main plot points and think of a couple ways that you might get to them.
Awesome.
Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is Destruction's Light. Okay. I that's the one with, okay, with the dragon. I have not taken a look at this chapter quite as much, to be honest. So I don't have any specific advice for this. I haven't gotten there with my players yet either, and I also didn't work on this chapter. But I I think, like, yeah, all of the stuff Mikayla said, and just keeping in mind that, like, even as your players advance, like the stakes always have to be raised, but that doesn't mean that, like, the stakes being raised doesn't always equal, like, the CR increasing, right? So sometimes that could be, there can be other challenges presenting themselves in, like, maybe it's not just in the fact that they're losing their, or their horde is getting damaged or something like that. Maybe it's that they already have a need that they haven't gotten filled, and because of what's going on, they don't have the ability to get that need filled. And so they have to figure out a way around this situation and a plan B, and it's harrowing because it's already happening around them. And what are they going to do, because the first idea that they had failed because of the limited resources. So.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great main point of this chapter. Obviously, we have the wrong co-authors to answer that question fully. So if you go to Twitter, you can totally tag Celeste Kukanowicz and H.H. Carlin, and I'm sure they would have fantastic advice as both other co-authors and writers of these sections.
Yes, I think.
And Anne Gregerson as well, of course.
And Ashley.
And Ashley, yes.
Yeah. We had such a big, awesome group of people who worked on this. Ashley Warren. I think this chapter was Hannah. I think this was H.H. Carlin. I think. I might be wrong. But yeah.
I don't know. It's been a hot minute.
It has. It's been about a year since we actually actively worked on writing this.
Wow, it has been that long now, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I remember when the book was announced, so many people I follow on Twitter were like, hey, this book is happening, and I played a piece in it. I'm like, oh my god, this is going to be so cool. So there are some other kind of story-specific questions here. So if it's something that, I feel like it wasn't exactly our chapter, or like, there was someone else kind of figured that part out. I feel like that's an adequate answer. But just in case either you touched on any of this, Mark Jesperson says, a question that keeps popping up in my mind is there a deeper meaning with having Levistus and Asmodeus indirectly active in the Dale on each site again?
I think that might be open to interpretation.
Yes, that definitely might be open to interpretation. Levistus, I think, is the inclusion of Levistus is obviously because he is he's the chill devil prince. I
want to be known as that someday, by the way.
Yeah, he's obviously he's frozen inside of this magical glacier by Asmodeus, and so his cult being active in the tundra, like, it just kind of makes sense. And so I think it's reinforcing those themes, and I think having other presences active in the plot is also just like adding another interesting. So the Cult of Alevistus in my game actually ended up taking a very important role because we had a player who decided to make a deal with Levistus, and so now he's multi-classed into Warlock.
Yes.
So that was fun. So that's a really fun big thing that we got going on. But then you also have like, you know, the Dorgar and like that faction happening, and you also have Aryl's presence and what that means, and all of these different factors working for and against each other, and existing in this place. Plus, like, you know, on the smaller scale, you have 10 towns. You know, it just kind of, you know, makes the world feel not only lived in, but also like there's dangers everywhere that you go.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not the first adventurers to ever be here.
And you definitely won't be
there's
the
always,
last.
yeah, exactly. There's always going to be more bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
That was a great answer, and I just love the idea of, well, you know, make a powder keg and wait till the players blow it up.
Can I point out something that is just like a personal thing as like a lore nerd? So in the chapter where they introduce Levistus, they actually say that he's from the wrong circle of hell. I don't know if anyone else noticed that, but they say that. I think I'm forgetting it right now, but I believe he's from the 5th layer and they say he's from the 6th layer, or it's from he's from the 6th layer and they say he's from the 5th layer of hell. But they got it wrong in the book, and I had a very joy moment of pedantically pointing that out to everyone, that this missed editing.
I love this.
Stuff totally gets missed. That's so funny, though.
Yeah.
And this is another one. I don't know if y'all have insight into it, but Anders wants to know, what is the reason for having Aryl fight in Chapter 5 and not having it as the end goal?
So that has to do with kind of like, we're talking about these layers of threats, right? So Aryl is like this big thing. She's a minor goddess, but she's causing this big threat to Icewind Dale in this area, right? And so then you have the stuff after that, kind of almost epilogue-esque adventure that happens after that fight, which is deals with things on a more multiversal level, and can really take a campaign from that, like, I am the protector of this region, to I am the protector of the world or the multiverse. And I don't want to say too much because there are not only spoilers for this book in the final chapter, but also spoilers for a storyline that D&D has been working on for quite some time. And uh, while the book is out, I still want to give people time to play it before we talk about it.
Super legitimate, and I've heard mysterious tellings of this tale before, and I won't delve any deeper, but everyone's got to be curious out there by now, right? What's up with all the stones?
The obelisks? Oh, I don't know.
No, of course not. I wouldn't even think to ask. Okay, so I know we've had a lot of... oh, I'm sorry, Mikayla, go ahead.
Are the obelisks popping up across our globe related? Is that a Watsy thing?
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Best marketing campaign ever.
Okay, now I'm gonna start searching the skies for flying cities. What? Nothing? I didn't. It has nothing to do with Netheril, I promise.
Who knows? I don't know what you're talking about, obviously. Can I edit that out before it's... No, there it goes. Never mind. Okay. So I know we've had a lot of good questions, but this next one I feel is perhaps the most important one that we've answered so far. And this is a question that goes after my own heart. I know a penguin Aarakocra with ice sculptures to sell. Which of the 10 towns would be the best market? Thank you, Dan Brotman.
I think...
Like I kind of got stuck
You
with
know,
Penguin Aarakocra, and that
Oh,
vision will be in my head
wait.
forevermore.
I feel like I know this character.
I mean, how many Penguin Aarakocras can there be in the world, right?
Mikayla.
yes.
I feel like I may have been on an adventure with a penguin Aarakocra who had to sell ice sculptures previously.
I think so. That does sound rather familiar.
Mhm.
I believe business was poppin' in Goodmead.
Mhm.
So from Michael Ellsworth, I'm kind of a noob when it comes to horror and making things scarier. My players, I think, are definitely scared for their lives because of how intense each of the combat encounters are. But how would you recommend sprinkling in more horror in between combat?
Mm. So Michaela mentioned earlier about the five senses. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that is definitely one of the ways that I would definitely recommend, especially if you're not like a huge horror fan or your players aren't a huge horror fan and they're like already easily spooked by the combat, like just adding in that little element of like the chill wind and like all of that stuff and kind of and if you want to get into the more mysterious aspects, you can introduce kind of just kind of unrelated things that maybe they'll investigate and then you can like put a plot point there if you want to, or it could just be a feature of the area that are just like strange and unexplained and stuff like that, like a lone footprint in the snow that you find or something like that that just sends shivers down your spine. Personally, for me, I have the exact opposite problem. I was actually the only person that Chris Perkins had to tell, please tone down the gore in your chapter.
Everyone else
Um,
had to turn it up.
yeah.
Oh, that's excellent because there's the next question deals exactly with this, so that's great.
Yeah. If you have problems with toning down your gore, I also have this problem. Just communicate effectively with your players. See what like that's the biggest advice I can give is just like check in with them, see what their boundaries are. You still want to make this a horror campaign and feel like scary, and sometimes scary doesn't always have to mean gross. I
Mm-hmm.
still like getting descriptive, especially like when there is like visceral horror, but you can describe visceral horror without getting into the nitty-gritty details of like describing exactly how the blood feels when you pick up that decapitated dwarf's head and it
Gosh.
touches your hands.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Also, that brings
Sorry.
me to my suggestion, which is to check in before you start a campaign or a
Always.
game with people
Yes,
and
absolutely.
and ask them specifically, like, on a scale of like movie ratings, do you want this to be rated R, PG-13, PG?
Mhm.
Because those have guidelines already for like what is included, and
Mhm.
can be a good marker. I would also say, in addition to just like the violence aspect of horror, you could emphasize how lonely everything is. The big empty distances between towns where it's just snow and dangers and you can't see anything. People all bundled up so you can't see their faces or body language or expressions. Towns where everyone is suspicious and no one wants to talk to you and you're walking down empty streets. Like
Mhm.
all of those things will help build up this environment that you're creating.
One of the things I like to do is I ask during my session zero is, and I do this for every single one of my campaigns, but I ask them what their character's biggest fear is, and I have them write it down on an index card, and that'll come through with the story, and it's come through in this game um, multiple times because of the nature of this campaign. And so there are definitely ways to sew in more personal horror and things like that, and I think that's really useful. I also like using dreams. So if there's ever downtime and stuff like that, like there was a time after they finished the um they finished the mountain climb quest and they were actually invited to stay the night at the couple's house and just like, like sleep next to the fireplace and cuddle with the dog. They all had spooky dreams that night. It was like the first like cozy night that they spent, and so like as like a contrast, I was like, okay, this is a very nice night. You finished a quest, all of these things. We had like a little scene. They talked to people and stuff, and then I just like described these kind of like spooky, eerie dreams that were personal to each character. So I think also finding that contrast by like giving them moments of light and then having that flipped pretty quickly into moments of like mistrust, horror, or like just like eeriness.
That was, again, like just good DMing advice in general from both of you. I think when we think about, like, say, D&D as compared to horror movies, it's hard to get that jump scare aspect you'll get in like a lot of slasher films, but the visceral descriptions are it yeah, again, provided you've checked in with your players and established safety ahead of time. But yeah, those are a great way to go. One of my personal favorite things is, since you can't do it with what they see in the terms of jump scare, a lot of times you can do it with what they don't see, because the unknown is terrifying. I like to think about like the first season of Stranger Things, where you don't see the monster until way, way into it. It's just frightening because you don't know what it is. But that's another one of my favorite tools as well. Michael Ellsworth had a cool idea about running it. One of the things that they plan is having some sort of chart for the dragon's time spent in each of the 10 towns. Basically, the dragon moves after a certain amount of hours have passed, or it's taken a certain amount of damage. Which I think that's a cool way to keep track of where's the dragon at. And I apologize, folks. We are getting close to our time limit, so I'm going to try and get a few more questions in. This is not a question, but I always thought of penguins as kenku, or pengu, if you will. And I will. I absolutely would.
Yeah. I love a pengu.
That's really fun. Hags are awesome for gross descriptions. That is true. Do you have any thoughts about playing evil characters in the game and what that could be like?
Well, do you want to go, Mikayla?
Sure. Yeah, so I have a good friend who runs an evil character campaign, and she's had like both, where sometimes they intermingle, or it's just like an all not evil aligned or an all evil aligned. And I think what she's found is that when all of the characters are somewhat evil aligned or like open to that, it's going to be more fun, because even if they have their individual goals, they're not like not being selfish about it, I guess, because we can kind of get absorbed in like our own characters' arcs, and if one has the goal of like being evil and just like messing stuff up, it can make it not fun. So again, I think that's like a big communication thing of just checking in with your players, and even if it's like a cool element of surprise and someone specifically wants to make it, just as a GM, bring it up to the whole table. Like, is this as conceptually, hypothetically, something that is okay?
Yeah. Personally, for me, I feel like with this campaign, you can actually start to experiment with. This gives you an opportunity to experiment with a character being evil because of the secrets that it already has introduced in the campaign. So everyone already has something kind of that they're keeping from each other. I what Mikayla said, like, as long as it's not whatever their like goal is, isn't counterproductive to what the actual like party is doing. So like if your party is like maybe they're like evil, but like they're an anti-villain. So whatever their goal is aligns with what the party's doing anyway, so they're gonna go along with it. And then they find out later that it was like, you like helped me completed my plan and I'm a bad guy, whatever. If it ever gets to a point, one of the things that I've done in my campaigns where like it's very clear that they're going into the range of like villain the characters are going to turn against them, I'm like, all right, this was a great arc. I love this. Your character, unfortunately, has gone into the grounds of NPC. So I'd like have a conversation with that character, with that player, and be like, you can still play the character, but you need to come up with another player character for this party. So like you can still like have input on like what this NPC does in the story, like with me as the GM like dictating where the story goes, but like because it's still your character, but like there's comes a certain point where it's like they're no longer a member of the party because it's clear that they're doing things for their own agenda and they need to take a step back to go be evil bad guy dude.
Yeah, and I think that also that's a great idea. I hadn't thought about it necessarily, but just something I have learned to start reminding new players about is that your characters are there to be in an adventuring party. They're not there to be a lone wolf. If they were a lone wolf, they would be off by themselves somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like really, if I would not recommend having a character play an evil character if they were a new player. I think that there comes like a being able to use GM discretion here, um, and being able to like trust your players as well. And sometimes it takes you a while to find those player groups where you can trust them and know that they're going to like not derail like the campaign and stuff like that. I'm fortunate that like now I have like pretty consistent like player groups with players I trust. But it hasn't always been that way. I've definitely like had like someone join a campaign where I thought it was going to be great. I've had good experiences with them before, and then all of a sudden they're throwing drugs in the princess's face just because chaos. So like, you never know. You never know what's going to happen, especially with new people, new players, and things like that. So I think it's just a matter of you know D&D can be a great trust building game, but wait to experiment until you're a little bit more familiar with your group, I would say. And maybe introduce some of those seeds. Like even just later on in the campaign, there can be motivations that turn a character evil during the campaign, and that's something after you've like played with them like for like a month or so, like you can be like, okay, I think this would be a good approach, like, or maybe they'll come to you and you can work with them throughout the campaign.
Yeah, yeah, and your mileage may vary, but as always, like the most important aspects to having a fun game for everyone is going to be consent and communication.
I think a lot of people are kind of afraid to have that meta conversation sometime of like I think if you want to play an evil character and you're with a good group of players, you can go to them ahead of time and be like, hey, I'm going to play this evil character that's eventually going to want to stab you in the back. And if they can build that story with you, that to me seems like it can be a lot more rewarding. And actually, while it eliminates that tension of the other players not knowing, it gives you so many more tools to be able to work with. And if if it's the right group of players again, they can ignore things that like they might not have had they not known that something was up, and just add more to that overall story. And it makes it a little less about you, but does make it more about the group in general in the story.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. And then it's your character is surprising the other characters rather than you as a player are surprising the other players. So it still has that element of like, oh, surprise and mystery and stuff, but everyone is in on it and it's extra fun.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think there's
And
something like rewarding on when you're watching a show or reading a book, and as the viewer, the audience, you can see these things coming, but the characters can't. And so it's a fun thing to play with in game too.
And that doesn't mean you have to give your hand away either. It's just like being able to like have the ability to have those conversations and be like, would you be okay with something like this happening, right? And like gauging people's like level of reaction to that and stuff like that. They aren't going to know the specifics. They aren't going to know what sessions it's going to happen in and stuff like that. Like for instance, you go into playing Icewind Dale and they have all these secrets. You know, people are going to, all the players know that each player is going to have a different secret already, right? And that's going to come up at different points in the campaign and affect the campaign in different ways. But they're not going to know that one of their fellow players is going to randomly die at some point because they have this parasite inside of them. And so like, you know, that like they signed up for like having these like unexpected horrifying things happen, and like we had conversations about that in our session 0, but like we were able to still like keep an element of surprise, keep an element of like horror, and have it happen organically. And that all comes with having a really awesome session 0, setting ground rules, and communicating with each player both individually as your GM as well as a group, and making sure everyone feels comfortable.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Maury.
Yeah, again, this is just great DMing advice in general. So I'm hoping everyone took notes, because this is another segment that I'm like, I'm going to go back over this again, because that's just, you know, even the things I already knew, that was just very eloquent. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's do just one more question before we do our big announcement, since we're getting short on time. From Vincent, comma, hi, love the book and currently... Oh, my screen just moved. Hi, love the book and currently running it for my friends. Was there any content or plot point that was cut off from the hardcover? That you can discuss. Or I guess even a yes or no would be fine there.
I mean, so when you're writing for a project, stuff gets edited in the editing process. So, like, stuff has changed slightly or more than slightly in parts of the book from when we originally wrote it. And that's okay. I don't know specifically if anything seriously got cut, though. So I would say probably normal amount
Yeah,
got
most of the
cut.
things that ended up, it was more so a matter of things getting slightly changed versus things getting cut. I believe they actually ended up adding pages to this book. So like there was like another chapter that got added after the freelancers were done writing, and they had some people in house work on some of the book as well. So this was oftentimes, at least based on my experience, like actually working in the building and seeing how the books get produced, like it seems to me that it's more a matter of like things getting changed or altered, and then also things getting added. They generally tend to have um, like um, if things get cut, it's because there's not enough space in the book and they try to recycle it in a future project or something like that. So I can't think of anything specifically with this book that got cut, because they did end up making it quite a thick book compared to some of the previous modules. So but some things did get changed and moved around. So
I think some goats got cut.
there were some goats that got cut. So, but we were able to get we were able to get about 75 goats into this book, and I'm still proud about
Wait,
that.
really?
Yes,
I
there
forgot how
are
many.
all together. I have went through and counted. I think it's like 72 or 73, but all together there's about 75 goats in this book, and that's goats featured in art, goat stat blocks, like individual goat stat blocks featured, and the number of times the word goat is just referenced, as in a figurine of a goat or an image of a goat is described in a chapter. So for those of you who don't know, um, my participation as a writer on this book was I wrote the mountain climb quest as well as designed the trinket table. Um, and the mountain climb quest, when I finished my first draft, I sent it to the other freelancers first to get some feedback. And so all of us, we got these little, like, kind of like sometimes like a couple of sentences, maybe some bullet points of like what the assignment was going to be. And for me, it was like a list of encounters that adventurers would experience when they go climb a mountain. And then I had to create the story and the characters and everything else around that, as well as some like mechanical elements. Like the first draft of the avalanche rules I ended up writing. But the actual one of the bullet points was just mountain goats. And I was like, how am I going to make mountain goats interesting? And so I did my very best. And I don't think the actual line that everyone fell in love with, all of the freelancers fell in love with, made it into that adventure. But it did, I think, make it into the description of mountain goats in the stat block in the bestiary, which was something along the lines of a hostile mountain goat cannot be quieted or something like that.
Yeah.
And well, let's just say the freelancers had a ball with it and was like, I loved the goats. That was my favorite part, were the goats. I want to put goats in my section. Guys, what if we tried to get as many goats past Chris Perkins's eyes as possible? And we were like, are we going to do this? Are we going to do this? Are we going to do this? And then we did it. And then I was like, oh gosh, this is all my fault. I should probably tell Chris Perkins about it. And so I walked over to Chris Perkins's desk because I was working in the office at the time. And I was like, so we kind of did a thing. It's all my fault. And he's like, this is awesome. I'm going to add more goats into the book. And so he added his own goats into the book as well.
So just to make sure I'm on the right page here, you had to tone down the gore you've submitted, but tone up the goats? Am I on the right?
Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
Cool.
Yes. More goats, less gore.
Yeah.
And we'll be selling those t-shirts as soon as I can make them up. There's a lot of love in the chat right now for both the mountain climb and the goats. This has been fantastic. This has been a lot of fun chatting with you both, and you've had just great, not only DMing advice, but also just design and adventure advice too. There's a lot of gold there, and I really appreciate that. And also, everyone in the chat, you have also been amazing. Thank you for that. So, coming up in about a month, on February 20th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, Mikayla and Morrigan will actually be running excerpts from Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden. And we have some open seats for that. I just put a link into the chat, so feel free to check that event out. There is a tickets button in the event, but if you want to get in on some of this goodness, there's a limited amount of seats for very obvious reasons. But come check it out. I mean, you've seen what they can do here, and it's been pretty fantastic. But before we call it a day, is there any other Icewind Dale stories or comments or anything that haven't been covered that you'd like to talk about?
Actually, we'll be talking about it again in case
Yeah.
I missed anything.
Excellent.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Like
feel free to send us more questions and we can continue to answer them.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that we end up talking about when we get interviewed is the goats, and as well as the fact that the freelance group that we had was pretty amazing, and it was my first time really working on a project like that in that kind of environment, and it was so welcoming and honestly made the transition for myself to being a freelancer a lot easier because I had such a supportive group of freelancers working on that project with me. And from what I've heard from the freelancers is it's very rare to find a group where you just kind of click like that, and you ultimately, I think we became friends during that. And it was all non-binary and women working primarily on this project, and it was just such a really good environment for writing and learning and stuff like that. And I I hope that more projects end up getting led that way. And from what I have seen on like the back end during my final days at the office, wow, I made that sound so like horrible. Like it was not like a bad experience by any means, but towards the end of my time at Wizards, like what I could see was like that they were really trying to set it up so that the freelancers on future projects ended up having um, experiences closer to the ones we had on Icewind Dale, Rime, and the Frostmaiden, which I think is a fantastic direction to go on for future projects.
Yeah, and speaking to that as well, I mean, it was my first RPG project as a writer, and it was really a trial by fire. So if you want something that is a little more guided to get started in um, writing, editing, doing the layout for RPGs, there is a great workshop by Ashley Warren, one of our co-authors, called RPG Writers Workshop, and they
Which
do like,
is
oh,
now
go
part of the
ahead.
Storytelling Collective. So if you look up Storytelling Collective, you will find it. So it's been
Yeah,
rebranded.
yeah, but it takes you through all the steps from coming up with an idea for an RPG to conceptualizing, designing, and publishing it. And in all of that, you get this great community of other people who are also doing that. So you have a very supportive community with tons of resources. So I can't recommend it more. It's fantastic and I love it.
Yeah, the next one is I think not coming up until July. They usually do it in July and November. But it is a fantastic program, and they also have a bunch of other resources and classes for RPG writers, creators, and just writers in general, that I highly recommend you check out. So big shout out to Storytelling Collective, Ashley Warren, and all the good work that she's doing educating over there.
Yeah, this isn't an ad. We just love it. But yeah, come play some D&D with us in February.
Yeah, I'm super
And we can talk
excited.
more about this.
Awesome. This has really been great. Thank you so much for taking the time out today to talk about this fantastic book and just give some killer advice. Again, folks, the link to get in on that game is pinned at the top of the comments. So check that out. Tell your friends. I mean, bring your friends with you, probably. Like, you want to play at
Yeah.
the table with them, right? And if you're not following Crumble and Keep yet, we'll be doing more things like this in the future. So give us a follow as well for all of our D&D and other RPG products. Again, thank you so much. And, well, I hope everyone has a fantastic day out there. Enjoy your weekend.
Yeah,
Yeah, take care, everybody.
take
Bye.
care.